You've probably heard someone say, "This is a hadith of the Prophet." It's a very common phrase, but if we look closely at history, saying it that way isn't exactly accurate. In fact, it's a bit like a long game of telephone. To understand why, we can look at the historical framework laid out in an essay by Nawardi, also known online as Cerdas Beragama, which highlights a crucial difference between two concepts. During his lifetime, the Prophet Muhammad never sat down to write hadiths. Instead, he lived out something called the sunnah. The sunnah is simply his real-time behavior, the actual words he spoke, the physical actions he took, and the everyday decisions he made. This diagram shows how we can look at the sunnah in two distinct ways. First, there are actions tied directly to divine revelation, like how to pray or fast, which are considered obligatory. Second, there are his purely human choices, like the style of clothes he wore or his choice to be a merchant. These everyday choices are non-obligatory. So where do hadiths fit into this? A hadith is not the action itself. A hadith is a story. It is a historical report told by someone else about those original actions and decisions. Because we live centuries after the Prophet, these stories are our only window into the past. We literally cannot know what the Sunnah is today without relying on the hadiths to tell us. But because a hadith is a story told by human beings, it carries the same risks as any other piece of history. A specific story might be entirely true, or depending on who is telling it, it might be completely false. This risk of human error is why we contrast hadiths with the Al-Quran. Unlike historical stories, the text of the Quran you see here was completely verified before the Prophet passed away. In fact, during his life, the Prophet strictly forbade his companions from writing down any of his personal habits or everyday sayings. He did this to ensure his human actions never accidentally mixed with divine scripture. This timeline shows the direct result of that rule. Because writing down personal stories was forbidden early on, hadiths were not officially compiled into written books until roughly 100 years after the Prophet died. For an entire century, information about his life survived strictly through word of mouth, passed down verbally from one generation to the next. Think back to our game of telephone. When relying purely on spoken stories for 100 years, human memory naturally falters. Details change and distortions happen. Over time, many actions were falsely attributed to the Prophet that he never actually did. During the Umayyad era, leaders like Caliph Umar bin Abdulaziz started to notice this dangerous problem. He saw that unverified wild stories about the Prophet were spreading quickly through society. To fix it, he launched a massive official project. The goal was to track down and gather this chaotic web of oral history before it got entirely out of hand. Later scholars created a pyramid grading system to filter these stories. At the base, Madhu, or fake. Moving up, Da'if, weak. Then Hasan, good. And at the peak, Sahih, authentic. Reaching Sahih became the ultimate seal of approval. But there is a catch to this system. The Sahih label is not an absolute mathematical fact. It is a subjective grade given by a human scholar, based entirely on their personal assessment of the narrators and the content itself. Because scholars are human, they disagree. One expert might examine a story and grade it as perfectly authentic, while another scholar might look at the exact same story and reject it completely. So if human memories are fragile, and even the best scholarly grading system is subjective, how do we actually verify if a hadith is reliable? We know what doesn't work. We can't use one potentially flawed historical story to check the accuracy of another questionable story. The only logical way to verify a historical report is by testing it against a baseline of absolute truth, and in this context, that absolute truth is the Al-Quran. This diagram shows how that verification process works. Think of the Quran as a filter. If a hadith aligns with the principles inside the filter, it passes through and is safe to follow. If it contradicts those principles, it should bounce right out. This rule applies universally. Even if a story was historically labeled as Sahih by famous compilers like Bukhari or Muslim, if its message clashes with the Quran, it has to be set aside. When dealing with centuries of history, human error is inevitable. By relying on the Al-Quran as the ultimate fact-checker, we remove the guesswork, protect against false stories, and practice a more thoughtful, intelligent faith.